was driving, imagining my birthday dinner tonight, with the only guest being my husband, in the warmth of our cozy kitchen, when the phone rang. My husband texted, "Stuck at work, happy 34th birthday." I didn't spend a second thinking. I turned immediately into our familiar restaurant and treated myself to a luxurious dinner. When the waiter brought me the bill with a hesitant look, he whispered, "Your husband is in the private dining rooms. He just proposed to a beautiful woman." I couldn't believe my ears. I walked over, looked through the gap in the door. I saw my husband kissing a woman. When she turned her head, it immediately made my chest ache as I realized who she was. I was about to kick the door open, but reason held me back. I took a photo and quietly walked away with a plan to make them regret it. But before I did anything, her husband told me his plan, which brought them down in less than 7 days. "My name is Harper. I am an ophthalmologist at a hospital in San Jose, and that day was my 34th birthday. My shift at the hospital ended earlier than usual, and I planned to drive to the supermarket to buy fresh ingredients to cook butter garlic grilled king crab, a dish my husband loves. As my car was about to turn into the supermarket entrance, my phone vibrated. My husband texted, "Work delayed. Happy 34th birthday." I read it, but didn't reply. He sent another message, explaining that he was working overtime to handle paperwork for a few elderly clients using their retirement funds to invest. A story I had heard hundreds of times. I put the phone down on the passenger seat and sighed. In that moment, I glanced back at the empty shopping bags on the back seat and told myself, if he's not eating with me, I won't cook. I didn't want to stand in a cold kitchen, preparing a meal that I would have to sit down and eat alone, listening to the clock tick and waiting for the sound of a car pulling up. No, not today. I turned on the signal and steered into the driveway leading to my favorite restaurant. A small place with warm yellow lights, wine-colored curtains, and a steak I absolutely loved. Even if no one celebrated my birthday, I would still treat myself to a proper meal, considering it a gift I gave to myself. When I walked in, I was led to a table near the window. Everything looked familiar and safe. The clinking of cutlery against plates, the low murmur of conversations from each group of diners, the scent of butter, the smell of grilled meat. All of it softened something inside me. I ordered my food, opened the wine menu, and chose a light red wine. When the glass was placed in front of me, the light reflecting in the dark liquid made me think involuntarily, 34 years old. How did I end up here? I took a sip, trying to keep my emotions steady. I didn't want my birthday to turn into a sad evening, just because of a message as cold as ice. But life rarely allows us peace for long. When the bill was brought over, the waiter, a thin young man, approached my table. But instead of placing the bill down and offering a polite smile like usual, he bent slightly, his voice so low that I had to tilt my ear toward him. "Your husband is in private room number 4. He just proposed to a very beautiful woman." I blinked. I thought I had misheard. I asked again, my voice trembling, "What did you say?" But he simply repeated the exact same sentence, then straightened up, his face going pale, as if he had just said something he shouldn't have. He placed the bill on the table and hurried away, leaving me sitting there as if someone had pressed a pause button. For several seconds, my mind was completely blank. Not a single thought, not a single clear emotion, only the pounding of my heart inside my chest. Proposed? Here? I gripped the edge of the table, slowly stood up, and walked straight toward the hallway where the private rooms lined both sides, unaware that the moment I was about to witness would change my entire life. I walked step by step, my mind shrouded in a thick fog. Each heartbeat felt like a heavy knock against my chest, pushing me forward while simultaneously holding me back with a vague, paralyzing fear. What if everything is real? The restaurant's private rooms were located at the end of the corridor, soft yellow lights casting down on the framed paintings along the walls, beautiful yet cold. The closer I got, the more the wooden floor beneath my feet seemed to soften, as if I were walking on water. Room number 4 was on the left, a dark wooden door with a small glass panel just large enough to see inside if you stood very close. I stopped in front of it. I placed a hand over my chest, trying to take a deep breath, but the air only reached my throat before getting stuck there. I leaned my face toward the glass. And in that split second, the entire world I knew collapsed. Grayson was standing very close to a woman, his body pressed against hers in a familiar way, the kind of intimacy only people in love, or who have loved each other deeply, can have. He leaned down and placed a slow kiss on her lips. Not a stolen kiss, not a kiss driven by alcohol, but the kiss of a man who was happy, unburdened, with no trace of guilt left in his heart. My body went numb from head to toe. I didn't dare blink. Then, as if something pulled my gaze to the right, the woman gently turned her head. A soft lock of brown hair slid over her shoulder, revealing a face so familiar that I almost laughed at the cruelty of fate. Tiffany, my cousin's wife, the woman living with a husband whom everyone in the family believed had been paralyzed after a stroke 8 months earlier. The woman who had sat for hours beside his hospital bed, wiping his face, spoon-feeding him porridge, inviting relatives to visit, smiling as if life had taught her how to sacrifice without conditions. I stood frozen, feeling as though someone had swung an iron hammer straight into my chest. Both of them, my husband and my cousin's wife, were here in private room number 4, calmly creating a world into which neither my cousin nor I had ever been invited. In that moment, my mind desperately tried to find another way to understand what was happening. Maybe this was just a momentary mistake. Maybe I had seen it wrong. The viewing angle was too narrow. The reflections of light distorted everything. Or maybe this was something I didn't yet fully understand. A part of me, the softest, weakest part, clung to every possible excuse to lessen the pain that had just crashed down on me. But then I saw the thing that completely destroyed my final attempts at self-deception. An open ring box on the table. The light from the hanging lamp above shone down, reflecting off the diamond inside. Clear, brilliant, undeniable. And reason told me, coldly, cruelly, a momentary mistake does not come with an engagement ring. I raised my phone, my hand trembling so badly that the screen blurred for a moment. I had to grip it tighter to take the photo. Just one. I brought the phone close to the glass panel and pressed the shutter. The click was very soft, but I heard it so clearly that it felt as if it echoed through the entire corridor. I pulled my hand back quickly. I didn't push the door open. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't scream. I simply turned around, straightened my back, and left the restaurant with footsteps so light they were almost unreal, as if stepping any harder would cause all the emotions inside me to shatter before I could escape that place. And when the restaurant door closed behind me, I knew my life would never return to what it once was. I walked out to the parking lot, feeling like my feet no longer touched the ground. The streetlights reflected off the car's surface, their glow blurry through my stinging eyes. I opened the door, sat in the driver's seat, but it took nearly a full minute for me to remember I needed to start the engine and leave. My hand on the steering wheel was so cold, it felt like I was gripping a block of metal in the dead of winter. I pulled onto the main road, and within just a few hundred meters, my heartbeat still echoed like the pounding of a hammer, steady, heavy, making me clench my teeth just to stay calm. I picked up my phone, my fingers trembling so badly that unlocking the screen became a task. I wanted to call my cousin Matthew. I wanted to tell him everything, that his wife, the woman the entire family saw as a symbol of sacrifice, had just sat in private room number 4 with my husband, kissing him like two people beginning a new life. I wanted to say it all. I wanted to scream. I wanted to show him the photo and ask, "Do you deserve this?" But when I scrolled to the letter M in my contacts, my finger froze. I swallowed the lump in my throat and placed the phone on the seat, as if it were too hot to hold for even another second. I kept driving, and not even 3 minutes later, I picked it up again. tapped his name, then hesitated, then set it down again. I repeated that stupid cycle more times than I could count on the entire drive from the restaurant to home, like someone trying to hold on to something invisible, afraid they'd be the one to break it. Because in that moment, images of Tiffany from the past 8 months came flooding back all at once. Her standing behind Matthew's wheelchair at the winter family gathering, her small frame bending patiently to push him step by step. Every time someone asked if Matthew was getting better, Tiffany would answer for him, her voice tight, as if drained from trying so hard to be a devoted wife. She wiped sweat from his brow, adjusted the blanket on his shoulder, hugged him from behind when the wheelchair got stuck on a step. Every gesture was so gentle it made everyone in the family adore her, some even more than Matthew. I remember one time my aunt said, "Tiffany is truly blessed. Not everyone has the patience to care for a severely ill husband like that." The whole family nodded. So did I. And that's why, when I tried to imagine Tiffany, the woman everyone respected for her selflessness, kissing my husband in an upscale restaurant, my head felt like it was twisting into knots. Why? Because I was afraid that if I spoke too soon, I might ruin something far bigger. I was afraid I'd misunderstood, afraid I saw it wrong, afraid that if I told my cousin now, I'd destroy his family over something I wasn't 100% sure about. But deeper than all those fears was the fear of being the woman who overreacted, the woman who hastily exposed others without enough proof, the woman ruled by emotion, doomed to live a lifetime of regret. I didn't want to be that woman. And for the next 3 miles, I kept repeating the same thought, in desperation. If I speak now, would I be destroying something I don't yet fully understand? I arrived home without remembering which roads I had taken. The house was quiet, dark, with only the hum of the air conditioner breaking the silence. I stood in the living room, keys still in hand, heart still pounding like frantic footsteps echoing in an empty hallway. I looked at the wedding photo on the wall. I was smiling naturally in that picture, and Grayson had his hand on my waist, his eyes looking like they couldn't pull away from me. Every beautiful image, every promise, every time I had trusted him, suddenly shattered into sharp shards of glass. I set my bag down, walked into the bedroom, and switched the lights on hard, as if I could push the darkness out of my mind. But that night, I didn't cry. I just lay there, eyes open, not sleeping, not blinking, until morning light bled through the curtains, and I was still staring at the ceiling. The next morning, I couldn't allow myself to be swept up by emotion any longer. I needed someone neutral, someone untouched by these tangled relationships, someone who would focus only on the truth and my mental state, without judgment. So I texted to book a session with Samantha, the therapist I'd seen twice a few years ago. Samantha was in her 60s, her voice soft but sharp like a fine blade, the kind of person who could look at you for 5 seconds and know exactly what you were hiding. I arrived at her office early in the morning. Her office was on the 3rd floor of an old building, scented faintly with lavender oil, walls hung with landscape paintings, and the lighting dimmed just enough to create a feeling of safety. She was sitting across from me, holding a brown leather notebook, her eyes steady and patient, as if she already knew I had brought a story that wouldn't be easy to tell. As soon as I sat down, Samantha asked only one question. "Where do you want to start?" That was all. No pressure, no rushing. But that question felt like unlocking something in my chest. I told her everything, from the early end to my shift due to a canceled patient, to the plan of making butter garlic crab for my birthday, the work-delayed text, my decision to treat myself at a restaurant, and finally, the moment I looked through the small glass window of private room number 4. I told her about the photo I took, the moment I stood frozen, and the feeling of my entire world being dragged into a pit I wasn't prepared to face. Samantha didn't interrupt. She nodded through each section, occasionally jotting down very short notes, so brief that I wondered if she was writing enough. But I knew she was noting exactly what mattered. The tremble in my voice, the fear when I mentioned my cousin, the inner war when I spoke of Tiffany. When I finished, Samantha set her pen down, looked directly at me and asked, "You talk a lot about Tiffany, but let me ask, how well do you know your cousin's personality?" That question made me pause. Then I nodded. I know him well. He's always been principled, straightforward, and once he decides something, no one can sway him. Samantha, so what if he found out his wife was cheating? I didn't even need to think. He wouldn't forgive her. Samantha tilted her head. And what if he found out you knew, but didn't tell him? That question pierced the last layer of my defenses. I swallowed. He wouldn't forgive me either. Samantha didn't react strongly. She simply leaned back, letting a few seconds pass, like she was giving me space to face my own answer. Then she said softly but sharply, "You didn't come here to ask me what to do. You came here to confirm what you already know." I looked at her, frozen. Samantha continued, "You already know what you have to do. You're just waiting for someone to give you permission, but truth doesn't need permission." And that sentence, like a final needle, cleared the fog in my head. I knew what I had to do, not because Samantha said so, but because I had known it since the moment I saw the engagement ring on the table yesterday, and when I walked out of her office, the fear in me no longer had sharp edges. It had settled like still water after a storm. That afternoon, I drove straight to Matthew's house. I didn't text ahead. I didn't call. I didn't want to rehearse words or practice an opening line. I only knew that I needed to see him now, before I talked myself out of it. Again. The San Jose sky, in the late afternoon, was painted in a pale golden hue. The sunlight tilted, casting a fake sense of calm over what my eyes were about to witness. Matthew's house sat at the end of a quiet street, with small trees lining both sides, leaves rustling in the wind as if whispering something I couldn't quite hear. I parked in front of the gate, my hands sweating so badly I had to wipe them on my jeans twice before pressing the bell. But no one answered. The front door was slightly ajar. Tiffany's car wasn't in the driveway. I guessed she was off getting her usual weekend beauty treatments. I stepped into the backyard, where sunlight poured over the small garden filled with rosemary, Matthew's favorite. He was sitting there, in a black wheelchair, facing the wooden fence. The sunlight highlighted strands of gray at his temples, but there was something different about his posture. Not at all like someone seriously ill, as the family had believed for 8 months. As I walked closer, the wheelchair wheels caught the light, and his breathing was steady. Too steady for someone with severe cognitive decline, like Tiffany had described to everyone. I stood facing him for a few seconds to gather myself. Then I began. I told everything, from the birthday text, to the decision to stop by the restaurant, to the moment the waiter whispered words that changed my life, to the image of Grayson kissing Tiffany, his wife, in private room number 4. I told it slowly, clearly, every word like a small blade cutting into my skin. Matthew didn't interrupt, didn't question, didn't look away. He just sat there, hands resting neatly on his lap, his eyes not wavering for even a second. What shocked me most was, he didn't get angry, didn't flush, didn't shake, didn't show any of the emotions that come with a sudden blow. Just silence. Silence so deep, the birds on the roof were louder than his breath. I finished speaking. I stood and waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for. A question, a reaction, anything. But what I received was something I hadn't expected. Matthew pressed his hands lightly on the armrests of his wheelchair. A small movement, slow, but sure. Then he stood up. Slowly. Not shaking, not wobbling. No support needed. He stood straight, turned to face me, like any healthy man on any normal day. I was speechless. My throat dried like I'd swallowed dust. I heard myself whisper, "You can stand?" Matthew didn't answer that question. He just looked at me, not with weakness, not with fatigue, not with any sign of cognitive decline, but with eyes sharp and lucid enough to send chills down my spine. Then he spoke, his voice full, clear, without a hint of slurring or delay. "I know everything already. One sentence. enough for me to realize the truth I had never even considered. For the past 8 months, only one person in this family had truly been deceived, and that person was me. I stood frozen in front of that statement, while Matthew remained upright, calm, as if he had never once sat in that wheelchair. The afternoon light hit his face, only making clearer the sharpness and clarity that all of us, relatives, friends, even doctors, had believed were long gone. I opened my mouth to speak, but Matthew gently raised his hand, signaling me to hold back. He exhaled like someone about to open a door that had been locked too long. The stroke I had was mild. His voice didn't tremble, didn't sound bitter, only carried a deep exhaustion. And the paralysis was fake. My entire body shuddered. I looked at the wheelchair behind him as if it were physical proof of a performance I hadn't realized I was part of. I had to hold on to the garden bench to steady myself because my mind couldn't keep up with what he was saying. Matthew looked at me with a mixture of bitterness and self-mockery. "Did you forget? Before my father forced me into the family business, I studied acting." It was true. He had studied at a renowned drama school for a few years. He used to talk about it like a funny memory, never imagining he'd one day use those skills in a tragedy of his own life. I stared at him, stunned. Matthew continued, "I noticed something strange about Tiffany about a month before my stroke." His voice was steady, but his eyes darkened. She started going out more, whispering on the phone, changing her phone's password, and most of all, the way she looked at me. No longer the look of a wife. "When I was hospitalized for that mild stroke," he said, "I realized this was my chance. A chance to find out who she really was." A chill ran down my spine. Tiffany, the woman who played the role of perfect wife in front of our entire family, had been outacted by her own husband, and done so more skillfully than she ever imagined. I faked it all. Faked speech loss. Faked loss of motor function. Matthew shrugged. Tiffany believed it immediately because she wanted to believe it. I had to sit down on the stone bench, my head bowed, as if I had just heard a story that didn't belong to the real world. Matthew stepped closer and continued. When she thought I had cognitive decline, she let her guard down. Then he explained, in a voice so calm it chilled me, that over the past 8 months, he had secretly hired a private investigator and a divorce attorney. The detective had provided him with photos of Tiffany and Grayson entering a hotel at 9:47 p.m., video of them hugging in an empty cafe, receipts for dinners in private rooms, pictures of them holding hands when they thought no one was watching, audio recordings from dates when Tiffany had lied about going to take care of her husband. Each piece of evidence was a sharp blade, not cutting Matthew, but cutting into the trust all of us had held onto during this time. My hands trembled as I listened, not because of the betrayal, but because my cousin had pretended to be weak for 8 straight months, just to clearly see the true face of the woman who lay beside him each night. Matthew looked off toward the rosemary bush he had planted himself. "I know this is bigger than an affair." Then he turned to me, his eyes sharp as a blade. "She wants the company." And in that moment, I understood. Tiffany wasn't just betraying her marriage. She was betraying the entire family legacy. I asked him, "So, what's your plan now?" Matthew took a deep breath, like a man who had mapped it all out long ago. "To reveal everything." The air thickened around us. "At our 12th anniversary celebration." No hesitation, no flicker of doubt. He spoke the words as if they had been carved in stone long ago. "I want her to collapse, exactly where she built her perfect image." I looked at my cousin, the man we had all pitied for the last 8 months, standing tall in the golden sunlight, no longer a sick man, but a husband fully awake and ready to reclaim justice in his own life. Matthew returned to the wooden table and opened a thick notebook lying there. He flipped through a few pages, stopping at a section marked with a red slip. When he spoke again, his voice was no longer as calm as before. It was deeper, heavier, packed with pain that had been buried far too long. Tiffany didn't just betray the marriage. I held my breath. Matthew looked me straight in the eye, enunciating each word clearly. She bribed a doctor. I froze. A cold shiver ran down my spine. What doctor? I asked, horrified. The neurologist who signed off on the diagnosis, saying I had severe cognitive decline. I was so shaken, I had to grip the edge of the wooden table to stay upright. That statement felt like a hammer to my head. Matthew looked at me, then went on, his voice unwavering. Tiffany planned to present that report at our upcoming 12th anniversary celebration. My eyes widened, my entire body going numb. He continued, she wanted to stand in front of our family and business partners and declare that I was no longer fit to manage the company, a public blow. Instantly, I envisioned the anniversary party. Tiffany walking up to the stage, holding a mic, feigning emotion. All of us listening, sympathizing, believing Matthew was slowly losing his mind. And right after that, Tiffany would take control of the company. Legitimate, legal, and with everyone's support. A perfect scheme. If Matthew hadn't discovered it early, he flipped to another folder and pulled out a small black USB. The investigator planted a recording device under the neurologist's chair. His voice was steady and sharp. The man took the money, took the instructions, took promises of investment. My throat went dry, and when I finally spoke, my voice came out hoarse. How long? How long have you been following this? Matthew clenched the USB in his hand, not tightly, but enough to show the rage simmering beneath. Months! He spoke slowly, looking directly at me. Every meeting, every envelope, every message. It's all been recorded. I stepped back, feeling like the world around me had flipped upside down. Tiffany, the woman who cried beside a hospital bed, pushed his wheelchair, earned the family's sympathy, had not only had an affair, but orchestrated a ruthless plan to seize power. Matthew's brows furrowed, his eyes darkened. She thinks I'm truly weak, thinks I can't fight back. He took one step closer, his voice clear and cold. But when a man is silent, it doesn't mean he's powerless. He looked at me as if etching that truth into my mind. It only means he's recording everything. That sentence echoed in my head like the sound of a door locking shut. The garden around us fell completely silent, only the wind brushing gently against the rosemary leaves. Matthew stood there, not as a recovering patient, but as a man who had long prepared for a battle of law, of will, and of strategy. I looked at my cousin, and for the first time in years, I saw the strength and sharpness he had always hidden behind a composed exterior. He wasn't afraid of Tiffany. He wasn't afraid of being deceived again. He was only waiting for the right moment to expose everything. Matthew looked at me, his voice low, but enough to send chills down my spine. Harper, you need to go home. I frowned. Now? He nodded. You need to keep playing the role of a wife who knows nothing. I opened my mouth to say I wasn't sure I could, but Matthew spoke before I could get the words out. If Grayson realizes you found out, he'll erase everything. His voice was calm, but I heard the warning behind it. Not a warning of danger, but of truth that could be lost forever if I made a single misstep. I felt a coldness spread down my back. Grayson, the man who used to hold me each night, who once said he loved the way I made garlic butter crab, was now someone who might erase every trace of his affair if even the smallest sign alerted him. Matthew placed a hand on my shoulder, gripping gently, not to comfort, but to remind me that I was now part of something far bigger than my own marriage. You have to act, he said. Like I've acted for the past 8 months. I took a deep breath and nodded. That night, I returned home as if nothing had happened. No curious questions. No hint that I had just seen my husband propose to another woman. I opened the fridge, washed vegetables, turned on the stove. Every small action done slowly, carefully, with a deliberately normal gaze. I cooked the meal I knew Grayson liked, something simple: pesto pasta, salad, and a bit of toasted bread. I smelled the garlic rising from the pan, but instead of warmth, it made me feel like I was replaying an old role in a familiar kitchen. When Grayson walked in, he took off his coat, smiled, that very my husband smile, so familiar that if I hadn't seen him kiss Tiffany yesterday, I might have believed he was innocent. I turned to him and smiled softly. "You're home? How was work today?" The most ordinary question I could ask. And this time, I used it like a mask. Grayson sat down, shared a few harmless work anecdotes. Nothing real, nothing meaningful. I nodded, added salt to the pot, and became the wife he still thought he had under control. When we sat down to eat, I said a line I had prepared in advance. A line that sounded casual, a very simple line. "Cousin Matthew's having a 12-year anniversary celebration this weekend. They've invited us." For just 1 second, one fleeting moment, Grayson's expression changed. But I saw it. I saw it clearly. The hand holding his stainless steel fork suddenly dropped it onto the table. A metallic clang rang out in the quiet kitchen. Grayson quickly bent down to pick it up, mumbling, I was just thinking about work. It's nothing." But I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. A brief flicker, just long enough for me to know Matthew was right. Grayson was afraid. My whole body softened, not out of weakness, but because I had just seen the most important thing that night. He didn't know I knew, and he had no idea I could be this calm. I ended that dinner as if nothing unusual had happened. I washed the dishes, cleared the table, turned on the dishwasher, while Grayson took a shower like he always did. Everything unfolded so peacefully that if anyone had been standing outside looking in, they would have thought we were a perfectly calm, flawless married couple. But inside me, a plan was growing. A plan I had never imagined I'd be part of. That night, I slept in the same bed with the man who had betrayed me. He wrapped his arm around me like always, but for the first time in my life, I felt no warmth from that embrace. I lay still, eyes closed, breathing evenly, to make him believe I knew nothing. But the next morning, as soon as sunlight touched the edge of the curtain, I opened my eyes with a clear objective in mind. Today, I would see a lawyer. I drove to the law office Matthew had hired. It was a small red brick building, not flashy like the big firms in San Jose, but discreet, practical, and full of experience. Exactly the kind of place someone like Matthew would choose for a quiet yet decisive strategy. The lawyer greeted me in a small meeting room with soft lighting, a long wooden table, and bookshelves full of legal files. He was in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair, sharp eyes, and a calm, measured voice, the kind of man who never lets emotion interfere with his work. He began, "Matthew has told me about you, and I understand why you're here today." I nodded. My hand clutched my handbag like it was the only thing keeping me from falling into a void. I told him everything, from the image in private room number 4 to Tiffany's plan to announce fake medical documents at the anniversary celebration. I told him how I had acted like a normal wife. I even told him about the moment Grayson dropped the fork last night. The lawyer wasn't surprised. He didn't panic. He simply asked a series of short questions, each aimed only at confirming facts. "Do you have a photo? Can you give a clear timeline? Have you told anyone besides Matthew?" And when I answered no, he nodded slightly. "Good. We need to keep all evidence intact until the right moment." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a neatly clipped stack of papers. I recognized it immediately: divorce papers. He slid them toward me. "I want you to sign first, but we won't file yet." I looked at the paper, at the signature line near the bottom. Part of me trembled. The other part felt eerily calm. "If we file now," the lawyer continued, "Grayson will be on alert, and he'll erase all traces of Tiffany." I remembered Matthew's words. If Grayson finds out, he'll erase everything. And now, hearing the same warning from the lawyer made it more terrifying than ever. I picked up the pen. Signed. My name appeared clearly on the page, like a cut, but one that was necessary to save myself. The lawyer gathered the papers, placing them carefully back in the folder. He looked straight at me, his voice firm and slow. Everything must happen at the right time. I asked, "When?" He replied without hesitation, "When Matthew reveals the truth at the anniversary party. That's when Grayson will be weakest, when his accomplice falls publicly." I inhaled deeply. Inside me there was pain, but at the same time, a strange kind of strength rising. Not the strength of rage, but of clarity. I stood up and shook his hand, and as I stepped out of the law office, I felt as though I had just entered a piece of music where the tempo had started to build. Everything must happen at the right time. That sentence repeated in my head as I drove home, and again as I stood in front of the mirror choosing a dress. Not too bright, not too eye-catching, just enough to look like a wife attending a party with her husband, completely unaware that her marriage had rotted from the inside out. And then the weekend came. That evening, the 12-year anniversary celebration of Matthew and Tiffany, a night Tiffany believed would be her victory. The party was held in the banquet hall of a luxury hotel in downtown San Jose. The moment Grayson and I entered, I felt the warm atmosphere, the lively conversations, golden lights spread across the room. Almost everyone was present. Both sides of the family, major shareholders, a few longtime business partners from Matthew's company, people with significant influence if a leadership change were to occur. I walked in with Grayson, but kept just enough distance, close enough for everyone to see we were husband and wife, but not so close that I felt suffocated by his deceit. His face remained calm, but I noticed his hand trembled slightly while shaking hands with familiar guests. He was afraid, and I knew it. At the front of the ballroom, Tiffany stood by a white-clothed table, decorated with photo albums and fresh bouquets. She wore a long champagne-colored gown, her hair curled and makeup flawless, the kind of perfection you could spot from across the room. A woman who believed tonight she would become the wife who takes over the company. As soon as Tiffany saw us, she waved naturally and smiled too brightly, the kind of rehearsed smile performed under stage lights. No one knew she had stood with my husband in private room number 4 not long ago. No one, except me and Matthew. Then, as the guests settled into their seats, the microphone buzzed. Tiffany stepped onto the stage. Her voice was soft, trembling just enough, as if barely holding back tears of emotion. "Thank you all for being here on this special day. 12 years?" She paused, hand over her heart. "Is a long journey of love, of patience, and of sacrifice." I wanted to laugh, but I sat still. I had to act, and I acted well. Tiffany continued, beginning to speak of their enduring love, how Matthew had always been her anchor, her voice catching, slightly shaky, each line like a scene from a memorized script. Then she placed her hand on the microphone, lowered her voice as if about to reveal something heartbreaking. "But there's something I've never made public." The entire room went silent. Tiffany sighed, her eyes red. The perfect, beautiful tears look. No smeared mascara, no mess. She said, "Matthew has been diagnosed with severe cognitive decline by his neurologist." A wave of murmurs rippled from the family's table. I saw some relatives raise their hands to their mouths, stunned. Tiffany wiped away a non-existent tear. "He can no longer manage the company as he once did. He forgets things. He's no longer clear enough to make big decisions. Her voice cracked. "I've tried to protect his dignity all this time." One aunt stood up, voice trembling. "Tiffany, you're amazing. You're a wonderful wife. Matthew's lucky to have you." Another voice from the shareholders' table. "If Matthew truly can't lead anymore, maybe Tiffany should step in." Everything unfolded exactly as Tiffany had planned, exactly how the fake report had been designed to affect people, exactly like a chess match she believed she had already won. I looked at Grayson, There was a flicker of excitement on his face. Very faint, but I saw it. Because if Tiffany succeeded, he would gain a share in Matthew's company. I looked back to the stage. Tiffany stood in the golden light, poised, confident, like a woman about to step into the power she had bought with every trick imaginable. And the most ironic thing was, the entire room believed her, fully, completely, as if Tiffany was the heroine rising from a family tragedy to protect her husband and save the company from collapse. But what Tiffany didn't know was that the lead actor tonight wasn't her. It was the man she had believed incapable of standing on his own. Tiffany placed a hand over her chest, bowing her head as if she couldn't bear the pain her husband's condition had brought her. The room was still murmuring, many guests dabbing their eyes with tissues. Some shareholders whispered about the need for a replacement leader, and Tiffany seemed the most suitable. This was the exact moment Tiffany wanted, the moment she'd take all the power. She brought the mic closer, voice shaking, perfect for the script. But I will try to. She didn't get to finish. A sound came from behind the stage, a chair sliding, a deep breath. Then a low, steady voice that didn't need a mic to carry through the hall. Enough, Tiffany! Tiffany froze. The room turned, and Matthew stood. No support, no trembling legs, no help. He stood up from the front row seat, the one Tiffany had arranged to make him look like a disabled husband in need of care. The silence in the room was so deep, I heard someone drop a soup spoon onto their plate. Tiffany stumbled back 2 steps, eyes wide, mouth open, but no sound. Finally, she gasped, You've been standing. Since when? Matthew didn't answer, didn't look at her, didn't need her reaction. He simply pulled a small black remote from his pocket, something he'd prepared over 8 long months, and pressed a button. Instantly, the lights dimmed, and the large screen behind the stage lit up. And in that moment, everything Tiffany had built over months collapsed. First, a photo of Tiffany hugging Grayson outside a hotel, with time and date clearly visible. Then, security camera footage of them walking arm in arm in the parking lot. Then, images of them sitting closely in a quiet cafe, holding hands. Then, a restaurant receipt for a private room, charged to Tiffany's card. The murmurs rose, then turned into gasps, then into angry, disgusted breathing. Tiffany shook her head over and over, her perfectly styled hair starting to unravel. No, this is a misunderstanding. But she didn't get to fabricate more, because a voice recording played. He's not lucid. I've finished adjusting the report. You just need to announce it at the right time. The doctor's voice. Then it lowered, trembling, breathing heavy, like in an interrogation room. I took the money. I did what Tiffany asked. I take full responsibility. The room went dead quiet. An aunt stood up and stormed toward the stage. No one could stop her. She grabbed a wine glass and flung its contents into Tiffany's face. You liar! You traitor! Tiffany flailed, red wine staining her champagne gown, dripping into the expensive makeup she'd spent all afternoon applying. Chaos erupted. Several family members stood up shouting. An old shareholder began crying, overwhelmed by betrayal. And then, 2 uniformed police officers entered from the back doors of the hall. They walked straight to the stage, without hesitation. Tiffany Rogers, you are required to cooperate for questioning on charges of doctor bribery and conspiracy to commit fraud. Tiffany went limp, as if her legs had lost all strength. She was handcuffed in front of all her family, business partners, and friends, people whose admiration she had spent years building. She turned, looking for Grayson, her co-conspirator. But Grayson was gone. I looked around. The seat where he had been sitting was empty. No coat, no wine glass, no apology. He had fled at some point, and I'd been sitting just 1 table away, yet never noticed. Tiffany was escorted out amid sobs, shouts, and chaotic footsteps. And Matthew stood there, upright, still holding the small remote. like a man who had just delivered the final act in an 8-month-long play. I drove home immediately afterward, and when I opened the door and stepped inside, I didn't say a word. Grayson was still sitting on the sofa, trembling, his hands clutched together as if trying to hold on to the last shred of control. His face was pale, eyes filled with panic. He had probably slipped out of the party the moment he saw Tiffany in handcuffs. I didn't go near him. I simply placed the signed divorce papers on the glass table in front of him. The paper landed with a small but sharp clack that startled him. He jumped to his feet, voice hoarse. "Harper, please, don't do this. I can explain." I looked him straight in the eyes, one last time, and said slowly, "Don't say my name again. No screaming, no crying, no shaking." I had already passed through the pain. I turned, opened the closet, and pulled out the large suitcase I had secretly packed days ago. The sound of its wheels rolling across the hardwood floor echoed like a death knell for our marriage. Grayson lunged to grab my hand, but I pulled away immediately. No force needed, only resolve. I stepped over the threshold, not looking back, not saying another word. The wooden door closed firmly behind me, sealing off the life I once had. Once outside, I called Lisa, my best friend from residency. All I had to say was, "Lisa, I'm coming over." And she replied, "The door is unlocked, come." I drove through the San Jose night straight to Lisa's house. She opened the door as soon as I rolled my suitcase up the steps. I didn't say anything. She didn't ask anything. She just hugged me tightly, the hug of someone who had watched me try for far too long. That night, I slept on Lisa's sofa, the first time in years not beside someone who had betrayed me. 3 days later, Matthew called and told me Tiffany had confessed everything, including Grayson's role. I listened in silence, my mind sinking into a still, glassy lake. 2 days after that, I got a call from Mrs. Henderson, my elderly neighbor, the kind who always listens to the radio at 5 a.m. and knows everything that happens on the block. Her voice shook, but it was clear. "Harper, you're not home, right? This morning the police came knocking at your door. They had some kind of papers. Looked like a warrant for Grayson. 2 officers took him away right after. He looked terrible." I stepped onto Lisa's balcony, phone gripped tightly in my hand. I thanked her and hung up. No tears fell. I just stood there, looking at the gray Seattle sky, the city I was about to move to. And for the first time in months, I felt my entire body grow lighter, like I had just stepped through a doorway far wider than I had ever imagined. I had lost so much, but in return, I had found myself again. 3 months after I walked out of that house, I stepped into the divorce courtroom with a completely different mindset from most women who come here. Not desperate, not broken, just ready to close a chapter I had long since outgrown. The hearing was shorter than I expected. Grayson appeared in an orange prison jumpsuit, hands cuffed at his waist. I looked at him once, not with blame, not with bitterness, but to remind myself that the man in front of me no longer had anything to do with my life. The judge read the verdict clearly. Divorce granted. Assets to be split by law. 50-50. No one won. No one lost. Just a truth finally recorded into court records. I signed my name, feeling like I had just placed the final period on a chapter I would never reread. 2 weeks later, I packed my things, hugged Lisa goodbye, held her tightly before leaving. I drove north to Seattle on a cold morning, gray clouds hanging low like they were ready to rain. But this time, the sky didn't feel heavy anymore. It just felt open, like it was making space for a new beginning. On my very first day at Seattle Hospital, I took the position of head of ophthalmology. I stood in my new office, hand resting on a polished wooden desk, looking out at the mountain range in the distance. A rare peace settled over me. I had lost a marriage, but I had reclaimed my life. 6 months later, the final news report on the case was released. The last punctuation mark on everything. Tiffany was sentenced to 6 years in prison for bribing a doctor, falsifying medical documents, and attempting to embezzle assets. She was ordered to pay $268,000 in restitution to Matthew, covering all the money spent on hotel rooms, dates, a Rolex watch, and the doctor's bribe. The bribed doctor had his license permanently revoked and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Grayson received a 3-year sentence after confessing to his role as an accomplice. I read the article on my phone while sitting in my Seattle apartment overlooking the water. Sunset light reflected off the hot tea on the table. I put the phone down, leaned back into the sofa, and took a deep breath. No more anger. No more questions of why. No more weight on my shoulders. Just one quiet truth. I had survived. And I was living better than ever. If you're still listening to this, thank you for spending time with the story of a woman who once thought she had to endure it all to keep a home. But the truth is, no one deserves to stay in a place where love and respect no longer exist. If this story touched you, or if you want to hear more journeys like this one, you can like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Who knows? Maybe the next story will be exactly what you need to take your next step.